Alejandra, and I'm going to be reviewing David's claim. Today I'm going to be responding to the claim that the Raiders will make it to the playoffs. David's three claims consist of: 1, the season has just begun, so there is still time for the Raiders to make it to the playoffs. 2, the Raiders have a new coach that will contribute to their success. And 3, the Raiders have received a new set of players, which will also contribute to their success. The evidence David uses to support his claims can be very ambiguous, because it can go either one way or the other way, depending when you're arguing. When it comes to reasoning, the speech seems to be biased towards the Raiders winning, which further made me question how reliable and objective the information actually is. Lastly, David fails to mention key information about the new coach, Jack Del Rio, and the teams the Raiders still have left to play. To begin, the first claim made is that the Raiders still have time to show they are going to the playoffs. David states they have been building themselves for quite a long time now. Years, in fact. And are finally reaching the high level by hiring Jack Del Rio as the new head coach. David labels time as a positive asset. However, time can also be betraying if momentum is not on your side. If the Raiders held a better record currently, then there would be more consistency, and it would be more of a reliable argument to say that time was on their side. However, the Raiders are currently at 4 wins and 4 losses. The Raiders are also currently on the hunt for a wild card position, and still have 3 challenging teams left to play, which include the Vikings, the Broncos, and the Packers. With this being said, momentum is not currently on their side, and I think it's quite ambiguous to say that time is an asset for them. Furthermore, when I researched the new head coach, Jack Del Rio, whose winning experience is supposed to lead the Raiders to the playoffs, I learned his experience is actually quite questionable. David stated that Jack Del Rio has coached teams that went to both the playoffs and the Super Bowl. Even though Jack Del Rio was a coach when the Ravens became Super Bowl champions, he was not the head coach whatsoever. In fact, he was only the coach for the linebackers, which means he could have been one out of a total of 15 coaches. Also, when Jack Del Rio was the head coach for Jacksonville, they did in fact go to the playoffs, but this only happened one time. Once again, there's no consistency. So although Jack Del Rio has been coaching for a long time and has seen some victories here and there, he is not as majestic or as grand as David originally painted him to be. Lastly, David emphasizes the strategic placement of new players and how it will lead the Raiders to the playoffs. In this claim, it is a bit more clear that the speech is biased towards the Raiders winning. David states, the players drafted and chosen to play complement each other. Where they are lacking in one position, they make up for it in another. To me, there is nothing unique about that claim. There's nothing unique about the claim that sets the Raiders apart from any other sport teams out there. Every team, whichever sport it may be, has enough knowledge to realize that the players need to be balanced. By choosing players that complement each other, the Raiders are doing nothing different than what their rivals have been doing for years. David also places high importance on these new players, as well as old players, but he doesn't account for simple common problems like injuries or players being suspended that could take out these key players from playing in further games. So in closing, the Raiders do still have a possibility of making it to the playoffs. I am not saying they are completely doomed. However, David fails to show how it is actually quite unlikely that this will happen. Thank you.
All right, it's organized well. We can see what you're arguing on the individual points. You brought up some reasonable presses, I think. There was even some evidence on a couple of points that were as helpful. On that first point, for instance, the current Raiders record is demonstrated pretty well. One of the things that just occurs to me as I'm sitting here listening to it is they're 4-4 when you talked about inconsistency. So how consistent have they been in who they've beaten or what the scores were like? For example, if they have won 4 games, but all of those victories were something that they scratched out or were lucky to get, and the 4 losses were all blowouts, suddenly I'm not exactly confident in the Raiders in this particular situation. I don't know that that's the situation. That would have been something maybe to examine a little bit more closely. But I thought that was a good point. The wild card race, I know we came and we talked about that sort of thing. So what position are they in? You know, we've got X number of teams in the American Football Conference, the AFC. So, 6 teams get into the playoffs. Their chances of winning their division are pretty much non-existent. They're 3 games behind the team that's in the lead, and they have to play that team one more time, and it's already beaten them once. So, that seems unlikely that they would win the division. So their chance is really for a wild card position. So how do they compare to other teams? I think you'd need a little bit more of that. I know that you're not an expert on football, but you could do a little bit of research and figure out, well, what other teams are competing with them in that situation, what other teams look likely. The truth is, I think the NFL looks like a whole bunch of mediocrity in the middle, and you got maybe 4 teams that are pretty solid, and then 4 teams that are pretty piss poor, and then everybody else is in the middle, and they're all struggling in the middle. So how do we really pick out and say the Raiders are the ones that are going to rise to the top of the middle? Because that's basically what his argument is. I thought the criticism of Del Rio was a good point to make. Is that he's not the the grand magician he's been portrayed to be. I forget exactly the phrase you used there, but I thought that was pretty reasonable. Let's face it, he's not. How many coaches have the Raiders had? Every coach that they've had since their last time in the playoffs has looked more promising. There's been some reason for hope. I think maybe we could go back and do a little bit of analogy based on those past experiences and all the hoopla that comes along with the new coach. Hey, everybody was thrilled to death that we had this coach, and then that guy got fired a season and a half later. Hey, there's a lot of excitement about this coach, and the players really want to play for him, and boom, he's gone after 2 seasons. Same sort of thing. It's all we're getting right here is the same kind of enthusiastic glad handing that you say, look, it's just a bias. People who like the Raiders, they're looking for whatever hope that they can find, and here's the current hope, but based on past experience, maybe we shouldn't be worried too much about it. And I thought that you were pretty reasonable at the end in saying, look, I'm not saying that the Raiders aren't going to make the playoffs, but the idea that they are, and that's the advocate's claim, is certainly not been well demonstrated. I thought that was a pretty reasonable summary of your argument. All right, thank you.